Welcome to Future Conversations, the podcast that explores research through the lens of tomorrow by Monash University, Malaysia.
Welcome to the podcast, rooted in research, shaping the future through conversations today. I'm Mira Sivasodi, Professor of Practice, Digital Media and Communication at Monash University, Malaysia. And our topic today is, it's something that I had to research a lot on, and it is not something that we talk about on a daily basis, and it is about neuroethics. Neuroethics is the study of the ethical, legal, and social issues around brain science and brain-related technology. As new devices like brain scans are used more widely, they raise concerns about privacy and how they might influence our thoughts and our feelings without us knowing it. Some countries in Latin America seem to be leading the way. Brazil, Mexico are updating their laws to protect people's rights when it comes to this kind of technology. These developments challenge us to think about how much our identity and personal choices come from our brains. Joining us to embark on this conversation, Laura Cabrera, Associate Professor of Neuroethics at the Center for Neural Engineering, Department of Engineering, Science and Mechanics at Penn State University. Also joining us, Eileen Soraya, who is the Managing Partner for Dispute Resolution at Darryl and Low, which is a legal firm here in Malaysia. Also joining us, Satoshi Ogawa, Associate Professor at Neuroscience at the Cheah School of Medicine, right here at Monash University, Malaysia. I'm going to start with Laura. Laura actually hails from Mexico City, now at Penn University. But Laura, Chile has sort of led the conversation, or they have actually included mental integrity in its constitution. Why do you think Latin American countries seem to be leading the way in this? I mean, you would think that, first world countries like Europe and all those countries would lead this, but why Latin American countries?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think first it's good to make the point that these conversations are being having also in Europe and the US. And there are certainly bills that have passed in certain states in the US about integrating neuro-rights. A big component of why Latin America has been leading the way, or it seems at least that it's leading the way, has been a lot of work from Neuro-Rights Foundation, which has had a lot of discussions with politicians in the area. Now, I don't want to be seen as having a stand, but I do think that it's a little bit problematic the way that the neuro-rights discussion has happened in Latin America. So even though it seems like it's leading the way, unfortunately it's been done in a way that is not including the context of Latin America as an important component of these developments. And I think now we're having discussions about how to make sure that neuro-rights are they the right tool to actually use in the context of protecting, human rights in lieu of new technologies, or are there other mechanisms that we should be exploring that might be more appropriate for regions?
So, which makes me wonder, what is in this constitution in Chile? What have they actually included that you feel doesn't take into account the context of Latin American countries?
Well, the change was simple, right? They include neuro data as part. So it's not a big change if you think about it. They didn't really expand it on what is meant by this. And one of the things that I see as problematic is that they've been relying on this work from the Neuro-Rights Foundation about what is mental integrity, what are even the 4 rights that they are putting forward, as these should be the 4 rights to be embraced. Now, there hasn't been enough scholarship about what does it mean to have a right on mental integrity or even in mental liberty, right? So I think it has really moved quick enough to prevent scholars to say, does that make any sense in terms of, our constitutional law? Or how do we actually implement this in a meaningful way? Which is one of the issues that I have with the discourse on neuro rights at the global scale.
Okay. Eileen, we have fundamental rights. We always talk about fundamental rights, but where do you think neuro rights, and do you think we need a subsection of fundamental rights such as neuro rights?
So I'm a big proponent on looking at what we have first and seeing whether or not those broad definitions or broad principles or values that we already have can potentially encompass these new innovations or new developments or new discoveries. Rather than trying in a very sort of piecemeal or patchwork fashion to meddle with, very fundamental liberties and rights that we already have. So to answer the question, my view at the moment, I think there is sufficient content in our current constitution to perhaps explore looking at it with fresh eyes or perhaps with the eyes of current days and perhaps expanding on that.
Okay. Satoshi, you are a scientist. You study the brain, and where do you draw the line? How far do you go, and where do you know it needs to stop?
From fundamental neuroscientist perspective, we often look at the brain is something away from our sort of autonomy, means that we consider ourselves, we know about me, but actually not true. Sometimes we made a decision and we don't know why I made such a stupid decision. Because I'm the one made the decision.
Yeah.
But actually brain made a decision. And sometimes we don't understand why brain made such a decision without my authority. So from neuron, because neuron has their own way of thinking, way of the logic behind. So I think we have to draw the line that where is our autonomy, who you are, how you determine yourself, how you identify yourself. So that is first you have to define. So some, let's say subconsciousness is something beyond your control. So even while you're sleeping, you move around, you went to toilet, it's your decision, you really decide to go, actually not true, because this is an subconscious conditions. So though the personality wise, this person did whatever the decision they made, but until where? So autonomy is something you have to consider, is some definition in terms of the self-identity. Yeah.
And there's still so much about the brain that we don't know, right?
Correct.
Which makes it even more difficult to come up with laws and where. I mean, to me, it's
Mira, I love
mind-boggling.
what he said about autonomy. As I was getting here, I was actually thinking, when I bought that last set of curlers, was it really me deciding, or was I so influenced by all the social media feeds that were coming? So if you think about it, even now, how much true, genuine autonomy do we really have?
Correct. Yeah.
And I think to speak to that point, is one of the reasons why I think neuro rights can be too narrow for us to start thinking how to protect the individual, right? So I think neuro data is just one component of personal information that is relevant, but we have genetic information. We have other behavioral markers that also tell a lot about who a person is. And so I think, how do we protect in a more holistic manner the individual, just in thinking to reduce them to their neuro data?
Yeah. So, I mean, we are sharing our information online anyway, right? Our platforms have our history, they just about have all sorts of information about us. So how different is that? Do you think there's a difference, Eileen?
Sorry, difference in what?
In neuro rights or even if you think about neuro laws in relation to how we share our information about everything else?
So I think, and I love what Laura said about definition. So when we talk about how the law approaches something, the law, I think, like scientists as well, we're creatures of precision and accuracy. So we want to know what exactly are we talking about here. So when we look at something relatively new, I mean, I'm going to call it new in the context, I think, of our country, to sort of ask the question, is it going to be any different, right, from how we've been hitherto sharing our personal data and all that? I suspect the answer, my natural answer to that, it may be no different in terms of how the community or society is looking at it. And will the law look at it differently? My take on this is it shouldn't. We should look at it at a very basic principles of doing what is right and doing what is right to protect people and balance it with innovation, I suspect. But it is the understanding and giving it some kind of definition that makes sense. I think that will be probably part of the challenge.
Would you agree, Laura?
Yes, absolutely.
But how would you define it?
Define what should be protected.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, right? But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do think from the perspective of ethics, you try to protect the individual. And we are not just our brains, right? So it just happens that the brain is one of the main organs that orchestrates, our bodily functions and is the center of our thinking. But as my colleagues were alluding, it's not the only place where this comes from, right? Like our microbiome has a lot of influence on how we behave. Our genetics also determines a lot of who we become as persons. So again, why are we reducing the individual, the person, to be just the brain, right? And I think even though I'm a neuroethicist, I do keep bringing this to, with my discussions with colleagues and students that, neuro is important, but we need a broader view of how we're protecting individuals and persons, because we're not just brains.
Okay. Satoshi, I want to know about artificial intelligence. There's so much talk about AI, how it could be, combined with data into more powerful interpretations of what's happening in the brain. How do we make sure this is not abused?
That's really tough questions, because nowadays we are heavily relying on AI or AI assist technology with your knowledge or without knowledge, some way. So the how to utilize AI. You're just not talking about. You're asking about AI. How you
Make sure it's not abused.
It's not abused. I think again the current. This is something yesterday I also gave a similar lecture to our students. We are writing manuscript, and we are able to utilize the AI technology or AI assisted tools to writing the manuscript. But when it comes to the authorship, because we have to have our authorship, and where the authorships come from, authorship is defined by your intellectual involvement. Means that you can ask AI to improve your manuscript readability or languages, but not entire manuscript should be taken care by AI. So you can ask AI to write everything without your authority. You have to be responsible what AI help you. So you should control, you need to assess, and you should be responsible what AI does for you. So otherwise, if everything written by AI, do you going to appoint AI as an author for your paper, which is really not acceptable, because AI just assists you what you describe, and then AI has no idea whether what you written is correct or not. They don't have ability to judge whether this is true or not. This decision made by you. So we cannot let completely handle the AI to handle everything. So I think you have to have your responsibility. Utilizing AI is nothing wrong. I'm really positive about AI ability, but in terms of the responsibility, I think we should still handle it.
Okay. How does that apply to neuroscience and the work that you do?
Neuroscience-wise, currently for basic scientists, AI has been utilized for many research analysis actually, because let's say, for example, if you look at the neural activities or in the brain, we have ability to analyze like all entire neurons firing patterns, which is comprises millions of the neuron networks, which is impossible for us to manually measure one by one. So we still have to rely on the AI. But when it comes to the data interpretation, we cannot really rely on AI's decision. We can ask AI, okay, what is all about the research or the data set? They give us data, but they cannot make conclusion. Okay, this is the state where you are considered to be, let's say, for example, a diagnosis. I think the AI assisted tool also will be very helpful for the diagnosis for example, mental disorders. But when it comes to diagnosis, decisions shouldn't be solely made by AI. So clinicians, psychiatrists must be responsible. Yeah.
Will the ethicist agree with Satoshi?
Well, in terms of including the clinicians, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we also need to be very mindful to acknowledging the limitations of these tools, right? While they do provide us the ability to process large amounts of data, right now this is one of the big changes, right? Like neuroscience has used, models in the past, but now we have such broad amounts of data and multimodal data, right? Data from different modalities, imaging technologies, behavioral markers. And so it is really powerful in that way. It helps us humans because we don't have the capacity to integrate all of that. But recognizing the limitations of which type of data sets have we been using? Are they diverse enough for us to make conclusions or make inferences about the larger population that we're trying to make those inferences? Like how are we training these models? So I think it can be used, but if it's used responsibly, we have to be really mindful of those limitations as we interpret the data. And definitely the human should be one of the key components of interpretation.
Yeah. What about neurodata, Eileen? Are there dangers, and how do we protect neurodata in the context of personal data? Because we have personal data now. Do we need such a thing as neurodata?
Okay, so going back to my answering the first question, I think we should try as much as we can not to have a new category of information if we can help it. So work within those broad strokes that the law has already provided. And why I say this is because of this. So when we interpret the law, if it's so specific, we will exclude everything else. So if neurodata, with the information we now have and the knowledge we now have, we define it in a very narrow way and we embody that in legislation, then when the judge comes to interpret what it means, it will exclude everything else. But if you have a broad definition that may or may not encompass neurodata, but we just have a broad definition of, for example, personal data, that may or may not include neurodata, for example. So I'm a proponent of leaving it in broad strokes. Broad may be best in a way, as opposed to having a specific neurodata definition. But I think we do need to look at how we are currently defining personal data, because the definition, at least in Malaysia at the moment, is information that is indirect and direct, but it is likely to be identifiable or identified. So that, I think, we may have a problem with neurodata, because it may not be identifiable, may not be easily identified or led back to the personality or individual at this point in time, but it should still be protected. So it's looking at what we have and perhaps evolving it rather than revolutionizing it into a new, I think, specific category to enable the law to have that breathing space to interpret.
Okay. And, when I was reading, I felt we needed new laws because...
Yes, I know you did.
Because when you read so extensively about this topic, you then realize how much of the brain and your behavior can be abused by data. You work, Laura, with deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, in which you implant a transmitter. Is it a transmitter in the brain?
It's an electrode. Yeah.
Yes, an electrode into the brain to help with Parkinson's disease. How do you then decide? And these implants can actually change behavior. One is it changes behavior. The other thing is it has the environment has a part to play in this process. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting. It's been a trajectory for me, because when I started, I definitely had concerns about this type of technology changing behavior, and especially because they're directly in the brain, right? But then the more I done research and have discussions with patients who have these devices, it was clear first that the amount of people that get these changes, unwanted changes to their personality, is a small portion. It seems as a side effect of the technology, right? And some of these can be controlled by the programming of the device. So that's one aspect. The other aspect was that one of the patients that I interviewed, she said, the medication that I'm taking already changes my personality.
Yeah.
So my disorder already changed who I was. And so it really made me rethink, we focus so much on the technology, but if we're very narrow, then we forget the person.
Yes.
And I think that has really been very instructive to how I take these conversations and approach neuroethics from a perspective that, the technology changes persons, but our environments, our society, there's other influences that also changes us.
Yeah, hence the broad definitions.
Exactly. So I'm going to jump in there. I think the law must be adaptable. So because the law will never be able to keep up, innovation will always be ahead, always. And it must be the case because we cannot prohibit innovation. We just need to balance it with protection of society. So for the law to be adaptable, you need the law to be broad. So I'm just going to go very basic. Law in Malaysia, we have common law, judge-made law, we have legislation, the hard laws. We also have soft laws with guidelines. So everybody thinks of laws as legislation. Legislation takes years and it becomes so embedded, and if it's so specific, we're going to have problems because I think it won't be flexible enough to adapt to innovation.
Okay. Satoshi, if something malfunctions, what do you think?
Yeah,
When something goes wrong, let me just
Correct.
go back a little to Elon
Correct.
Musk, because
Yes.
he's doing clinical trials
Yes.
on humans, wireless connections to the brains with phones and devices. What Neuralink does is actually implant brain chips in the brain, and the device sort of helps with individuals who have paralysis, movement disorders. And what it does is it is designed to allow individuals to control computers with their minds. My God, this is mind-blowing, especially as we speak about a topic like neuro-rights. I mean, Satoshi, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really agree on that, because just Lola's mentioned Eileen's the conversation. I just felt that what if the person's mentality or personality being changed due to the appropriate therapy, but as a result of the alteration of personality, they made something did some like a criminal.
Yeah.
Is this personality fault or the treatment itself? Because as a result of treatment procedure, that meant the personality has been changed to someone else. So their former personality has already disappeared. As a result, they made wrong. Whose fault? So that is something we always concern. That's why all the researchers working on to make sure that such things never happen. But we still don't know many things about the brain. And the brain is not like a mono-unit organ. There's a multi-cellular component. One switch off changes maybe 100 over switches to the rest of the brain, because they all connect each other. And the connection, we have zillions of the connections there, and we couldn't still resolve all the connections, how the connections work together. And the connections keep changing second by second. So we need to really carefully do the research, find the foundation that to understand how the brain works. And then, though the technology keep growing, but same time, the scientists needs to be aware that there are some still very unknown things happening. Even the brain surgery make significant changes in the personality, in behavior, and all the outcome consequences later on. So that's how to prevent abuse, possibly. There are many other molecules which can even enhance the personality, change the mood. As a short term is great, but long-term consequences don't know as a result of the enhancement of the brain activity, how it turns to be wrong side. Yeah.
You know, which makes me think then I can just now go out and do something and say it was my medication.
Yes.
I was behaving this way because of my medication.
That's not a new thing if you think about it.
So how do you
Yes.
manage the law then, Eileen?
Okay, so I was going to say,
Oh my goodness, I'm thinking of crime here and
Yes.
criminals
Yes.
and
so what the law generally does, broadly speaking, is when we look at who to blame or who to attribute responsibility for a particular adverse act, law looks at who is going to be culpable by doing a fault-finding investigation and inquiry. So in Malaysia, that adversarial system, we use our system and we try and see who factually is at fault. Now, the idea that something can happen and may harm somebody or may result in an adverse event, which I may not be totally in control of, i.e. my brain is not totally mine in a way, if I may speak very, very loosely. This is not a new thing. If we think about it, when I started learning law, not too long ago, it's not true.
I know how long you've been practicing. So
The concept of, there was this case I remember reading about where somebody had an accident because of a condition I think that person had that led to the person having this accident and injuring somebody. Now then the law said, hey, but this person wasn't in control of the car at the time. Then the concept of automism came into place, where it automatically happened. For example, I wasn't in control. Therefore, the law said you can't blame. You cannot hold this person culpable because this person was not in control of his or her mind at that point, or other parts of the bodily function. Similarly, in criminal law, we have concepts such as diminished responsibility, insanity, for example, where again someone is not totally in control. Having put the science together with the law, the science confirms the person is not completely in control of his or her mind and has done something terrible. The law says it's not fair. Law is looking for fairness and justice and what is right. To then blame that person because something has taken over. So it is not new in a way. We already have concepts and approaches to this kind of events where the brain, my brain, I'm not totally in control of that, and the law looks at it. Well, it was not right, therefore, to attribute either civil or criminal responsibility to that particular individual.
Okay, so I'm just thinking like when you drive under the influence of alcohol and you kill someone on the road, this would apply then.
No, but the blame is you shouldn't be drinking alcohol. There is blame. So the law is looking. The law is not a get out of jail free ticket. Let's put it that way. It is quite, because definitely, especially if someone has been harmed, the inquiry that is going to be held is going to be pretty stringent. If you have caused, for example, death, the law is not going to say, oh, just because you had drinks, it's going to be fined. The law will then go back and see, but what is it that you shouldn't have done? And start there and then move on.
Okay. Laura, I'm coming back.
It's a sensible creature,
It
Mira.
is,
It's a sensible creature.
I know, but seems like it. Thank you for breaking
There you
it
go.
down, though. Would you like to get her on your teams to help you understand neuroethics? Because I think you've got it sort of, at least I think, you're looking at it from the right perspective. However, it is still of some conflict for Satoshi as a scientist and for you, Laura. Do you think you have succeeded very much as a neuroethicist since you started working in this area? What do you think have been some of the little wins or the research that you've actually done? Would you like to share that with us?
Yeah. So a recent one is, again, I do a lot of research with public engagement, different public. So, it could be patients from certain disorders, clinicians, and again, each one bring their own experience and expertise that is really valuable. And so I remember one of my studies, we were asking this question about invasiveness, right? We were thinking about procedures like deep brain stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is another neurotechnology that is not implantable. And it was really interesting to then start hearing that patients specifically had concerns about, for example, yes, DBS might be invasive because it's implantable, but if I go to the psychiatrist and I have to tell them about my personal life and my feelings, that also seems invasive. So it was really interesting because that had led to publications that have really inquired into the term of invasiveness. And now I see more people using implantable versus not implantable rather than invasive versus non-invasive. Because this concept of invasiveness not only has a physical aspect, but it also has psychological aspect of invasiveness and even emotional aspect. So that has been a win, I think. And I think even the inclusion of different stakeholders in the conversation has been a win, right? Like I think we have tried, and I hope successfully, to include others into the conversations, not only lawyers, clinicians, neuroscientists, social scientists, and the people that are going through, should I be using this technology or not, right? Like right now we focus mostly in the medical space, but a lot of the new technologies are being expanded to other applications, from entertainment to sport to workplace. And I think then the discussions take a different flavor because we don't need to use these technologies for a medical, focus or goal. And I'm thinking of Neuralink when you mention it. Yeah. Right now, one of the issues in neuroethics is that, of course, it can, help people with full paralysis or with ALS or disorders that, truly it would be great if we can have something to help this, this patient population. But at the same time, they're thinking, well, this can be expanded beyond medical application. And then I think we as a society need to have a pause and think, do we really want or do we really need this type of implantable neurotechnology to, just to be able to communicate and send my emails with it? So I think it really leads to more conversations to be had.
Okay. Eileen, you do a lot of medical legal cases, I know, and that's very much your forte as well. How would consent play into something like this?
So like I said just now, science is always ahead of law, and I suspect ahead of clinicians as well. So when we talk about consent, it is ensuring that, and we talk about it in the context of a patient-doctor consult or patient-doctor interface or interaction. It is important, I think, to try as much as we can to balance that the imbalance of knowledge and position that we have. So when I agree or I consent to something, the law tries to say, give as much information as you can that is material so that the patient knows what they're agreeing to. So when we talk about innovation or areas of where there's a lot of new things coming up and already being used by the clinicians, so the concern is that does the patient really know what the patient is agreeing to?
Yes,
because
exactly.
does the clinician really know? So we have both sides, I think. So if you ask me, the answer to this is ensuring that anybody who wants to use that tool, and I'm going to call it a tool, encompassing anything that is new, must know as much as they can that is available at that point in time so that they can impart that knowledge to the vulnerable, which will be the patient.
Laura, how do you legislate equitable access to these types of technology, and what has Chile done, or Latin American countries? Have they looked at that aspect?
See, this is another reason why I think neuro-rights makes, I have issues with how it has been focused, because it's so focused on having it in the Constitution, in these self-governance instruments, have it there. But then it hasn't focused on how do you implement that? What does that mean for the general population of that country? And I think if we were to put the focus and the energy that the neuro-rights movement is having in Latin America to equity of just other, life-saving technologies, we would be in a better place, right? I think sometimes we forget that in those certain regions of the world, we have other problems that might not be the problems that we have in the US or Canada or Europe. And maybe the use of neurotechnology will take a very different perspective if we think, how can we manage equitable use of neurotech in Mexico or in Malaysia, right? It doesn't need to be the same because the context is different, and we need to be very, aware of how that context is going to shape the use and what it means then to be equitable. So I think we have a long way, unfortunately, to get there. But even in the US, for example, where we think we have a lot of technology, my work has shown that that's not the case, right? Like, we have a lot of people from rural places in the US that don't have access to neurotechnology. Even people that live in big cities, they might not have, the money to be able to pay. Their insurance might not cover it. So unfortunately, we should be having more these conversations about how can we make sure that people that need the technology get access to the technology in a timely manner.
Okay. Satoshi, any thoughts on that, on equitable access to the types of technology? I mean, would you be looking at areas in which, minorities could possibly be facing in terms of neuroscience in your area?
Yeah, I mean, main technology, unfortunately, not available everywhere due to some limited restrictions. But as a researcher, we always try to figure out how we can make this technology more available in terms of the financially, make it cheaper, more easily accessible, or non-invasive ways, rather than putting like a DBS is quite heavy things. But if we can replace by something smaller, cheaper unit, which can do the same similar things, so that we can make the tools available equally for all the global community, even so that's one thing. Secondly, I think there are many ways to solve these issues to equity. Simply maybe financial issues.
Yeah.
Then if you get some enough funding from elsewhere, makes those tools available. Let's say some like foundations can provide some resources to make those tools available, even simple tools. can be available all the underdeserved communities.
What does this mean for Asia? I mean, Latin American countries are taking the lead, but do you think Asia will follow suit, or at least start thinking about this?
To make these tools available.
Yeah.
I think,
Sorry. Just in terms of this whole idea of neuroethics and neurotechnology, neuro-rights. Do you think Asia is actually already embracing this in our own way, perhaps?
I think the neuroethics is closely tied with the cultural context as well, social cultural context, because even some beliefs or our way of the how to sort of handle our personality from a neuroethical perspective, probably West, the East may be taking different way. So we have to really closely work with the social scientists, how they say definition, or how can I say, when it comes to the neuroethics, how we treat the neuroethical concern from the cultural perspective. Maybe in the West they take it different way. In the East, maybe they take in different way. In Asia, may have their own the way, like due to stigma, which is not happen in the West. So we need to really carefully, or not carefully, but I think this is something very interesting area, a neuroethical perspective, social context of the neuroethics itself globally, and see how we can implement those neuroethics in the regional perspective.
Yeah. Eileen, any thoughts from the legal perspective? And the fact that we are Asian, and as Satoshi said, traditional-wise, socially, we are sort of geared differently. And do you think that would make a difference at all, as far as the law is concerned?
So I think it hasn't reached our shores in terms of those people in either the legislative or the judiciary. In terms, we have not had cases. Let's put it that way. So we've not had, I think, a real consideration on this particular subject matter. But if you ask me whether or not it should be looked at differently, and I think the way because we cannot help it, we're human beings, we are living in this particular country, and it's these human beings that are making these laws, interpreting these laws, or other judges who are deciding on particular cases. So we cannot be divorced from our culture, our identity. It will happen that way. But what is important, because the law is not, we don't look at it in silo, we take from each other. We take from other countries and our neighboring countries and neighboring jurisdictions. So when we look at the laws, yes, we are influenced by our own identities and culture, but we must take into context, like Professor Satoshi said, the global sort of movement in this area. And that's what the law does anyway, because we look at what's happening in other countries all the time. So yes, I think the sort of primary approach will be who we are, but I think in addition, we will be looking at what's happening around us. And I think that's probably the right way to look at it anyway.
Can I then just say that there's consensus that in terms of medical science and legal institutions, we're not ready for neuro rights? Or is it great that we are actually just starting this conversation, Laura?
I think what it has been relevant in this context is that we need to start thinking with these new technologies, do we need to think things differently? Now, if the consensus I think that we have this moment is that we need to think with a broad stroke, right? And I think we have current legislation, soft governance mechanisms that can already incorporate neuro rights without changing the law. And I think that's actually the approach that I think neurotechnology does have impacts on human rights that need to be considered, but that we can look at our current mechanisms to see how it can be adapted to approach or address these issues.
Okay. Do you think many moons to come you will see this area of neuro law, Eileen? Do you think that's something that we might have to look at in the future, or do you still think that we still go with broad strokes for now until there really comes a time that we need neuro laws? Because technology is advancing, as Satoshi said, so quickly. Do you think at some point we will actually need this? And it could be a new area of the law altogether.
Let me look at my crystal ball. Give me a minute. Yeah, I'm not going to discount the possibility, let's put it that way. I'm looking at it more in the context of a subject area of education and awareness, not so much a third party making a new area of law, but in terms of, because the catching up with innovation, the best way is actually, and the fastest way is to educate and make awareness. Once people generally know that this exists, and then we will start thinking about, oh, is this right? Is it not right? And infringements may happen without people even realizing it, because they're not even aware that it exists. So the awareness of its existence, the awareness of it as something that potentially could harm, or I would say also potentially could assist and move us, I think, many steps forward. To me, the key is not so much the law. The law is there, like I said, in broad strokes. It should be able to deal with whatever that's now. If there's a need, then it will adapt. But more importantly, get the word out there, spread it out, create awareness, knowledge, and educate people. What is this about? What are we talking about? What could be good and bad? If we don't have that information being disseminated, then, let's not even talk about the laws. People don't even realize rights are being infringed.
Yeah. Would you have a message for us, Satoshi?
I'm trying to think of some point. I'm just talking about long-term future. People now considering the memory storage, memory retrieval. Personality can be transferred to the completely into computer area. Because if you consider us as a personality belongs to our brain, whether our mindset can be transferred to completely outside of our body, if we consider ourselves the brain as our personality, whether those information transfer from our brain to somewhere else can be considered another personality. And if this personality in the other side, out of our body, made some choices or decision, whether we should complain or we should claim that, okay, this right belongs to this person, not me, and someone copied your idea from this body, whether you steal idea from me or this personality outside of my brain. So in the long-term future, someone's considering to transfer all the brain's mindset to someone else, like a truly brain-machine interface. Those people are really considering, which is possibly can be done. So something we have to think of that direction as well, where your personality belongs to. As Laura mentioned, is human being definitely something we have to define it. But in terms of idea, brain set, or the mind decision you made is from your the neural information. So those are the things I was just thinking of.
Okay. Laura, your message.
I think I will kind of agree with Eileen in saying that education and awareness is such an important tool that we have that we should use and expand. I just, from my discussions with colleagues and even in my own research, this idea that, for the general public, these are ideas that they have not really exposed to much. And what they are exposed to sometimes tends to be very biased, very hyped. And so we have a duty to really balance the conversations and really bring, a more balanced perspective on what is possible, right? Especially like with Neuralink, brain-machine interfaces, reading thoughts. Really a balance and a conversation that can really tell people this is what is possible, delineating what might be possible, but more importantly, what type of society we should like to live in, right? Because I think this is where ethics come. Like, technology can get us there, but do we want to get there? And how do we want to get there?
Okay. Thank you all very much for joining me today. Laura Cabrera, Associate Professor of Neuroethics at the Center for Neural Engineering, Department of Engineering, Science and Mechanics at Penn State University. Raja Eileen Soraya, Management Partner of Dispute Resolution at Raja Darryl and Law, and Satoshi Ogawa, Associate Professor of Neuroscience, right here at the Jeffrey Cheah School of Medicine, Monash University, Malaysia. This has been Future Conversations.
You were listening to Future Conversations, a podcast by Monash University, Malaysia. For more information, email neuro.media@monash.edu.